The Last Rooftop, a witness to history. April 30th, 1975. Saigon, South Vietnam. The sound of helicopter blades cut through the smoky air like the final breaths of a dying city. Jack Harrison stood on the rooftop of the U.S. Embassy, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. His uniform was stained with sweat and dust, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but there was no time for rest now. His eyes scanned the chaotic streets below, the throngs of desperate civilians trying to push through the gates, the soldiers scrambling to hold their ground, and above it all, the unmistakable figure of a helicopter approaching, its rotors a deafening roar. Jack had been here for hours, directing evacuees, pulling civilians and soldiers alike into the helicopters, one by one. His mission had always been clear: get as many out as possible. But now, with every minute that passed, that mission was slipping through his fingers. There were too many people, too many hands reaching up, too many faces full of fear and desperation, and not enough helicopters. "Come on, hurry!" Jack shouted, his voice rising above the noise as he reached down to pull a woman up into the chopper. She was shaking, tears streaking down her face, but she clung to his hand with all her strength. He gripped her arm tightly, the weight of the moment settling in as he pulled her aboard, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this would likely be her only chance at survival. The woman's husband was close behind, his face a mask of desperation as he reached for his wife, but Jack didn't have time to help him just yet. The helicopter was ready to leave, and there was no telling when the next one would arrive. The North Vietnamese were getting closer, the sounds of artillery fire growing louder with every passing minute. Jack's instincts screamed at him to get back to the ground, but his feet remained frozen, rooted to this rooftop. This was his duty. This was his moment in history, whether he wanted it or not. A young Vietnamese soldier approached, eyes wide with panic. He had been part of the South Vietnamese forces, and now he was just another man caught in the crossfire of a war that was not his to fight. "Please, sir," the soldier begged. "I need to get out. They will kill me." Jack looked at the soldier, saw the fear in his eyes, and without thinking, reached out. "Get in, quick!" he barked, pulling the young man onto the helicopter. There was no time to question, no time to think, only time to act. The helicopter's doors slammed shut with a deafening clang, and it lifted off, carrying another life to safety. But Jack's eyes were already scanning the crowd below, searching for the next person to save. There were still more, so many more. But the helicopters were running out. His hands were getting tired, his body was running on fumes, but his mind refused to stop. Every time a helicopter left, Jack felt the weight of the people left behind. His heart ached for them, the children, the families, the soldiers who had fought beside him, but would never make it out. And as the next helicopter descended, Jack knew this would be the last one. This was it. There would be no more. One by one, he grabbed the hands of the innocent, the frightened, and the brave, pulling them into the safety of the helicopter. Each time, he could feel his grip weaken, his strength fading. But as long as there was one more hand to grab, one more person to save, Jack would hold on. He was their last hope, the last soldier on the rooftop. As the helicopter lifted once again, Jack caught one final glimpse of the chaos below. The streets of Saigon were a blur of movement, smoke and fire. The city was falling, but he couldn't dwell on that now. He had one last task, one final act of mercy. And so, Jack reached out again, pulling the next soul to safety, his heart heavy with the weight of a mission that had no end. The last helicopter was leaving, and Jack was still there. The noise was constant, helicopter blades chopping through thick, humid air, people shouting, babies crying, gunfire in the distance, muffled but persistent. Saigon was unraveling by the minute. "Get them up! Get them moving!" Jack shouted, sweat dripping down his temple as he motioned toward the rooftop stairs. The building, a CIA outpost, was packed from basement to top floor with desperate South Vietnamese families, military officers, translators, cooks, wives, children, all clinging to the hope of a final helicopter out. Jack was 27 then, tall, wiry, and angry at the world. He hadn't planned on staying in Vietnam this long. He hadn't planned on caring either. But he did, especially about one man, Captain Din Nguyen, ARVN Intelligence, and his quiet wife Lynn, who cradled a tiny baby girl no older than 6 months. Jack had worked closely with Din for over a year. They weren't just colleagues. They were brothers in arms. "Jack," Din said quietly, pulling him aside in the stairwell. "You promised." "I remember." Jack nodded. "You, Lynn, the baby. I'll get you on that chopper. I swear." The building shook slightly as another helicopter landed on the roof above them. The stairwell groaned under the weight of fleeing families. Below them, in the streets, Saigon burned. Chapter 2. Whisper of the End, Saigon. 5:20 a.m., April 30th, 1975. From the 5th floor of the CIA Annex building at 22G Long Street, Jack could see the city's edge melting into smoke. Columns of it, black and slow, drifted over the rooftops like dark omens. The sunrise wasn't golden. It was gray. Inside, the air reeked of sweat, gun oil, and fear. Radio static crackled beside him. A panicked voice broke through. Tiger 1, this is Dragonfly. Evac on final pass. Prepare LZ over." "Copy, Dragonfly. LZ clear. Standing by." Jack slammed the receiver down and turned to the cluster of Marines and CIA officers beside him. "Final pass means final pass. We've got maybe half an hour. After that, you're on your own." A junior officer beside him, Carter, barely 22, with shaking hands, murmured, "Sir, what about the crowd down there?" Jack looked through the broken window. The street below was packed shoulder to shoulder with civilians. Some had American flags wrapped around their shoulders. Others held up photos, ID cards, waving frantically toward the sky. "We let him up the stairs. We lose the roof," Jack said flatly. "This isn't about hope. This is triage." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the thump, thump, thump of approaching rotors. Then, a distant explosion. The building shook. "Tank fire, outskirts of the city," Carter whispered. Jack didn't reply. He was watching the stairs, listening for the sound of boots, or sandals, or screams. He knew it was coming. It always came. At the base of the stairwell, a steel door had been welded shut the night before. Inside, Vietnamese families crowded on each floor. Some were high-ranking officers and their wives. Others were clerks or interpreters who had once served Americans. All of them were now targets of the North Vietnamese forces closing in. Among them stood Captain Din Nguyen, calm as ever, despite the cries echoing down the hallway. He held his baby daughter with both arms. His wife, Lynn, leaned against the wall, pale with exhaustion. "Do you trust him?" she asked in Vietnamese. Din nodded slowly. "Jack is not like the others. He made me a promise. Marines keep promises." From 3 floors above, the thundering blades of a descending helicopter grew louder. That sound, so familiar, so normal during war, had now become something entirely different. The sound of possible salvation. Jack moved back up to the roof. It was chaos. A Bell UH-1 Huey was hovering just above the landing pad, its skids inches from the rooftop. Wind lashed across the surface, sending papers and dust swirling. A group of 6 was being rushed aboard. 3 Americans, 3 Vietnamese officers. A woman tried to climb through the railing, holding her baby outstretched toward the crew. The Marine nearest the edge shouted, "No more room!" She didn't let go. She wouldn't let go. The crowd screamed. Jack stepped forward, pulled the woman and child away from the ledge, and barked to the crew chief. "Next pass! Clear space for civilians!" The man hesitated. Jack leaned in, voice cold. "That's an order." The Huey lifted off again, its noise fading into the smoky sky. Back below, Carter approached, pale and sweating. "Sir, there's a major problem." Jack turned. "What?" "They're cutting the power to the building. The embassy thinks this place has been compromised." Jack clenched his jaw. Without power, the elevators and backup communications would go dead. The stairwell would be the only way in or out. "Get me Din," he muttered. "Now." "Sir?" "Get me Captain Din Nguyen. He's the reason I'm still here." Chapter 3. Faces in the crowd. 6 o'clock a.m. Rooftop stairwell. 22. Gia Longstreet. Jack gripped the rail of the stairwell as the vibrations from another Huey rattled the entire building. Below him, the lines of people had grown longer, denser, louder. The heat was rising, and with it, the desperation. A woman screamed. A man shouted something in Vietnamese. Jack didn't catch it, but the pleading tone was universal. Everyone wanted to get out. But there were only so many choppers left, only so much room in the sky. He scanned the crowd. Faces. So many faces. Tired, hollowed by fear. Some were smeared with ash or blood. Others wore suits, still clutching briefcases, as if they could negotiate with chaos. Mothers clutched babies. Children cried and reached for strangers. Then he saw them. Captain Din, standing at the edge of the 5th-floor landing, holding his baby against his chest. Lynn stood beside him, one arm looped protectively around his back, her face streaked with sweat and soot. Jack pushed his way down. "Din," he shouted, waving. "Come on, we're running out of time." Din's face lit up with grim relief, but the moment was cut short by a commotion behind them. A wave of bodies surged forward. Someone must have shouted that the helicopters were leaving for good. The crowd began to crush inward, toward the narrow stairwell. "Move! Move!" Jack barked, drawing his sidearm and firing a single shot into the air. The noise froze everyone. "Get back! Families with kids first!" he growled. A man in an ARVN officer's uniform lunged forward anyway, dragging a screaming boy by the arm. Jack grabbed the officer by the collar and shoved him back. "You pull that again, I'll leave your ass here to rot," he snapped. The officer backed off. No one else moved. Jack turned back to Din. "You okay?" Din nodded, but Lynn looked faint, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Jack threw his arm around her. "Come on, one step at a time." They moved slowly, painfully, up the final 2 flights. Jack walked ahead, clearing the path, barking orders in clipped Vietnamese. Carter followed behind, keeping the rest of the crowd at bay. Jack kept glancing back. Din's eyes never left the rooftop above, where the spinning blades of the Huey waited. The baby was crying now, a dry, rasping cry. No more tears left. 6:17 m. Rooftop landing. They burst through the door as the next chopper began to lower. The wind hit them like a wall. Dust and hot air swirled, blowing Lynn's hair into her face. Jack pointed. "That's your bird. Go." Din hesitated. "And you?" Jack shook his head. "I'm not done." Lynn climbed into the helicopter first. Jack helped Din hand her the baby. Suddenly, a boy, maybe 7 years old, was shoved onto the roof by the wave of people behind. He tripped and nearly rolled off the edge. Jack lunged, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him back. The boy sobbed, clung to Jack's leg. "Where are your parents?" Jack shouted. The boy said nothing, just pointed behind him. The crowd was too thick to see. Jack turned to the pilot. "How many more?" "2. That's it." Jack looked at Din. Din looked at the boy. For a long moment, everything seemed to stop. Just the sound of blades, wind, and a decision neither man wanted to make. Then Din reached down and lifted the boy into the helicopter. "Tell Lin I'll find the next one," he said. Jack grabbed Din's arm. "No, we go together." But it was too late. The pilot signaled liftoff. The Huey lifted, and Jack watched as Lin clutched her baby and the boy, reaching back toward her husband. Din stood still, his face unreadable. "They'll be safe," Jack said quietly. Din nodded, but neither man could look away from the sky. Chapter 4. Ghosts in Uniform. 6:45 a.m. Inside the CIA Annex building, 3rd floor. The roar of the departing Huey faded into the smoke-laced air. On the rooftop, Din watched it shrink into a dot against the pale orange horizon, carrying away everything he loved, his wife, his child, a child who wasn't even his, but who needed saving more than he did. Jack stepped beside him in silence. "You did the right thing," Jack said. Din didn't answer. His face was blank. The same face Jack had seen during ambushes and patrols, during midnight interrogations and dawn firefights. But this wasn't war anymore. This was the end of it. And endings were colder. Behind them, the rooftop door banged open. Another Marine emerged, shouting against the wind. "Evac's done! That was the last bird in our window. Embassy's pulling the plug." Jack spun around. "What?" "No more choppers, sir. They're consolidating at the embassy." "That's 6 blocks away." "I know." Jack stared at him, then down the stairwell. Below, it was unraveling. 3rd floor hallway, CIA Annex. They descended quickly, only to find the halls crawling with what remained of South Vietnam's unraveling elite. RVN officers sat slumped against walls, weapons discarded. Some had already torn the insignias from their uniforms. Others still clung to their ranks. Majors, colonels, even one general, like they meant something. One young lieutenant paced back and forth, mumbling to himself in Vietnamese, his pistol in hand. He didn't look older than 20. Dien walked up and spoke softly in their language. Jack didn't understand all of it, but he caught enough. "There's no shame in living," Dien said. "You have families. You are more than your rank." The general looked up with bloodshot eyes. "There is no life for us after this. They will come for us one by one." Jack looked around the room. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts in pressed uniforms, clinging to order in a world already collapsed. And in the middle of it stood Dunn, tall, proud, steady. "Captain," Jack said, drawing him aside, "we can still make it to the embassy." Dean shook his head. "I won't leave them." "You think they'd all follow?" "No," Din said quietly. "But some will, and if we go alone, we might not make it either." Jack didn't argue. Not yet. He turned to the room. "Listen up!" He barked in English, then repeated roughly in broken Vietnamese. "One last chance. We're heading to the U.S. Embassy. They're still running evac. But we move now. Anyone who wants to come, gear up. No weapons, no uniforms, civilians only." The room stirred. A few men looked up. One by one, shoulders straightened. Someone tore off a captain's patch. Another man picked up a child's coat, draped it over his fatigues. The general remained seated, unmoving. "General?" Dean asked softly. The old man didn't look up. "My war ends here." A gunshot echoed from one of the inner rooms. Jack flinched. Another officer had made his choice. By 7:15 a.m., a group of 14 had gathered. 5 officers, 3 wives, 2 teenage boys, a nurse, and a grandmother with a cane. Jack handed out scraps of food, stashed documents in bags, and pulled a tattered street map from his vest. 6 blocks. Foot patrols are everywhere. and the North Vietnamese could be in the city by now. Din slung a bag over his shoulder. We take the alleys. Move fast. No stops. Jack looked back once more at the dark building, the faces in the shadows, the ghosts who wouldn't leave. Then he stepped out into the street and into the fire. Chapter 5. The Alley. March 7:20 a.m. Streets of Saigon. They moved in a tight group through the narrow alley behind the CIA annex building, shadows pressed against the crumbling walls. Jack led the way, Colt pistol at the ready. But hidden beneath his vest, Din stayed at the rear, watching for anyone falling behind. The city no longer sounded like itself. There were no horns, no chatter, no music from cafes. Only distant gunfire, barking dogs, and the ever-present thrum of panic just out of view. Behind them, the world they had built, CIA offices, RVN command posts, safe houses, was collapsing like wet paper. Jack whispered without turning. No names, no English. We're civilians now. Ahead, a side street was littered with trash, abandoned bicycles, and a smoking Jeep with 2 bullet holes in the windshield. A bloated dog sniffed a body slumped near the curb, then trotted off. The nurse in their group gagged. Jack raised his hand, and the group stopped. They waited in tense silence as a truck rumbled past the main road ahead. Painted green, not ARVN, North Vietnamese. Jack counted 6 soldiers in the back, AKs slung casually, like they'd already won. Maybe they had. He waited 10 seconds, then waved the group forward. 7:45 a.m. Nguyen Du Street. Crossing the open avenue was the riskiest part. The embassy was now just 3 blocks away. So close, yet impossibly far. A U.S. Marine truck sat overturned at the corner, riddled with bullet holes. Smoke curled from its undercarriage. Jack took a breath, turned to the group. One at a time. Fast. If I say hit the ground, hit the damn ground. He pointed across. That tailor shop. That's our next cover. Din nodded, took the old woman's hand. The rest held tight to what little they carried. Baby photos, paper IDs, cheap wedding rings, whatever fragments of life they had left. One by one, they ran. Jack watched each figure dart across, the nurse, the teenage boy, Din, and the grandmother, until only Carter remained with him. Your turn, Jack said. Carter hesitated. What if they don't let us in? They will. How do you know? Jack met his eyes. Because I told them you're coming. Carter nodded and ran. Jack followed. 7:50 a.m., U.S. Embassy gates. By the time they reached the last intersection, Jack's shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. Every instinct screamed to run, but he couldn't, not yet. Ahead, the U.S. Embassy loomed behind high walls and barbed wire. Crowds had already gathered, hundreds of Vietnamese clinging to the gates, pounding on metal, screaming for rescue.